You would not survive 1 week of an ancient winter. Not one. For most of human history, when the temperature dropped below freezing for months at a time, staying alive required choices that would horrify a modern person. Burning the dead for warmth, eating each other when the food ran out, deciding calmly who got to live. This is not a story about toughness. This is a story about how far a human being will go when the only alternative is freezing to death. Picture the world itself first. During the last ice age, much of Europe and Asia wasn't forest. It was a frozen grassland called the Mammoth Steppe. Wind-blasted, treeless. Winter temperatures regularly dropped to -40. There was no morning news telling you when it would break. There was only more cold and no way out of it. There was barely any wood at all. And when the wood ran out, humans did something that sounds almost impossible. They built their houses and their fires out of the dead. At a site called Mezhirich in Ukraine, archaeologists found circular huts built from the bones of more than 100 mammoths each, skulls stacked as foundations, tusks curved into doorframes. These weren't decorations, they were engineering. Dried mammoth bone doesn't rot in the cold the way wood does, and it burns hot enough to hold a fire through an entire Arctic night. Entire families lived inside the skeletons of animals they had killed and burned the skeletons of animals they hadn't, just to see morning. But a warm skeleton doesn't help you if you're standing there naked. For most of the Ice Age, humans were terrible at clothing. Neanderthals survived brutal winters for 200,000 years, mostly by draping loose hides over themselves like blankets. No stitching, no seams. It worked, barely, but the gaps let the cold straight in. Then, around 50,000 years ago, something changed. At Denisova Cave in Siberia, archaeologists found tiny needles carved from bone, thin enough to pass thread through. Homo sapiens weren't just wearing skins anymore, they were tailoring them. Fitted sleeves, sealed hoods. Some researchers believe this single object, a needle, may be part of why our species outlasted the Neanderthals in the coldest parts of the world. Warmth wasn't comfort, it was a competitive advantage. And when the cold still won, frostbitten flesh that turned black had to come off before it spread. Cut away with a stone blade, with nothing for the pain but someone holding you still. Archaeologists have found ancient skeletons with fingers and toes amputated this way that healed over. The person survived. Somebody made the decision to cut, and somebody else let them. Shelter and clothing kept you alive for a night. Food kept you alive for a season. And in brutal cold, the ancient body ran on one rule that overruled everything else. Fat, not meat, is what keeps you alive. Here's why. Survive purely on lean meat, and your liver can't convert protein into energy fast enough. Push past that limit with nothing to balance it, and the body starts poisoning itself. Arctic explorers in the early 1900s documented the symptoms. Diarrhea, headaches, exhaustion that doesn't lift no matter how much you eat. They called it rabbit starvation. You can die with a full stomach. Ancient humans didn't need a name for it. They just knew. A killed mammoth wasn't valued for its meat first. It was valued for its fat cracked straight out of the bones and eaten raw before the carcass was even fully butchered. A single carcass, fat included, could decide whether a tribe survived February. This is also why your brain still lights up at the smell of frying fat today. That instinct is 20,000 years old, and it has never once been updated. But when the mammoths didn't come, and the stores ran dry, some ancient humans crossed a line that anthropologists still argue about. At a cave called El Sidran in Spain, researchers found the bones of at least 12 Neanderthals, cut marks in the exact places you'd butcher an animal. Long bones cracked open for the marrow inside, the same way they cracked open deer legs. Some researchers call it violence between rival groups. Others call it something colder. In the depth of an Ice Age winter, with nothing left to hunt, the last resource available to a starving group was each other. Similar marks have turned up at Krapina in Croatia, dated even earlier. This wasn't one isolated tragedy. It happened often enough that some researchers believe it was a known, understood last resort. Nobody wrote down what that choice felt like, but somebody had to make it. And it left a scar you can still see today in a completely different part of the world. Among several northern Algonquian peoples of Canada, oral tradition describes something called the Wendigo, a spirit born from a human who succumbed to starvation and turned to cannibalism, cursed afterward with a hunger that could never be satisfied. Anthropologists documented actual cases of what they called Wendigo psychosis. People in the grip of winter famine who became genuinely convinced they were transforming into the creature. Some begged their own community to kill them first. That wasn't superstition invented for fun around a fire. That was a culture building an entire mythology around a threat that had clearly happened often enough to need one, and the darkest choices weren't always about food running out. Sometimes they were about who got to eat it. In several documented Arctic societies, elders have described a practice, and early anthropologists recorded it too. The oldest members of a group, those who could no longer keep pace with a moving camp, would stay behind in the snow rather than slow it down. This wasn't cruelty forced on them. It was framed as a final act of care, an elder choosing the cold so a grandchild could eat. So what does any of this have to do with you, sitting somewhere warm right now? More than you'd think. That obsession with fat that kept your ancestors alive is still running in your body today. It's why fried food and anything calorie-dense hijacks your brain harder than a salad ever will. You still carry brown fat, tissue whose entire job is to burn energy just to generate heat, left over from a species that spent tens of thousands of winters one bad month from freezing. Even the low mood some people feel every winter, the pattern doctors call seasonal affective disorder, may be an ancient setting still running, a body trying to conserve fuel through a scarcity season that, for you, was never actually coming. Even that low-grade fear of running out, of not having enough saved up, of the dark itself, traces back to nights exactly like these. Your ancestors didn't survive the Ice Age by being comfortable. They survived it by burning the dead for warmth, stitching hides into armor, prioritizing fat over everything else, and, in the worst winters, crossing lines. Most people today can't imagine crossing. Every single person alive is descended from someone who made it through. Not the strongest, not always the kindest, just whoever was still breathing when the cold finally broke. You are here because thousands of winters in a row, someone made an unthinkable choice. And it worked.